Good morning, ladies. It is good to see you back again for lesson number 2 on Jacob. Have you ever wondered why God works through people? I mean, He doesn't have to, He certainly doesn't need to. God literally spoke the world into existence without any help from anybody. And yet, God still chooses to do His work in this world through people. I thought about why He might do that, and I realized there's a whole lot of reasons. But I just want to share 2 thoughts that I had on why God chooses to work through people. And the first one is that God is the one who created relationships. If you know the Garden of Eden, He said, it's not good that man should be alone. So I'm thinking God, who created relationships, also desires a relationship with us. Another thought I had about why God works through people is as a testimony to the people that don't know Him. Kelly even mentioned this in her prayer, if you were listening to what she was saying. But when God works through His people, people have an opportunity to see that don't know Him, to visibly see a kindness that's not of this world, a forgiveness that's not of this world, compassion that's not of this world. And they know there's something different. And that difference is they're seeing the character of God literally being displayed for them by the people of God when God works through people. Centuries ago, God raised up a very special nation through a very ordinary man. And by the way, it's most often the case that God works through ordinary people. So you're all able to be on board in that case, right? But he raised up this special nation through this ordinary man by the name of Abraham. And he told Abraham that when his time on earth was done, he would continue the work of establishing that nation through his son Isaac. And then when Isaac passed on, he would continue the work of establishing that special nation through Isaac's son Jacob. And of course, Jacob is the focus of our study. And so beginning this morning and throughout, our focus now will be not on those who came before, but on Jacob himself. So that's kind of where we are today. I have 3 divisions this morning. I ordinarily have 2, but I have 3 today. The first one I have entitled Jacob's Destiny. The second I have entitled Jacob's Deception. And then the third one, Jacob's Dream. Now, before we jump in this morning, I want to start by doing just a very, very brief recap on where we were last week. And the reason for that is because, as you've already picked up on, I think, the story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob all kind of overlap at certain points. So there are things, even though we're focusing on Jacob, that we need to have in mind that we learned last week. And the first one is that God made a set of promises to Abraham, promises that he would carry forward in future generations. Those promises broadly were that he would make of him a great nation, that's that special nation that I just mentioned, that he would give the land of Canaan to that nation, even though the Canaanite people were living in the land of Canaan when God made that promise to Abraham. And then most especially that through his seed, singular, all peoples of the world, all people of the earth would be blessed. And we know now that that singular seed was Jesus. Then later, in Genesis 17:19, God told Abraham very specifically that since he was about to pass, that the promises made would now continue through Isaac. So when we ended our story of Abraham and Sarah, basically, and began our story of Isaac and Rebekah, we learned that they married. And the last thing that we read last week was that, and Isaac loved her. So that brings us then forward to where we're going today, and that's beginning in Genesis 25. Now, when we come to Isaac and Rebekah, they're married, they're in love, they've been married now for 20 years. And unfortunately, like Sarah before, Rebekah is barren. There are no children after 20 years, even though God had said that it was now through Isaac he would build this great nation. Well, fortunately, unlike Abraham and Sarah, who took matters into their own hands, Isaac prayed instead of following suit. And we're told in 25:21 that Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. And the Lord answered his prayer. His wife Rebekah became pregnant. Now, clearly, Isaac's birth was miraculous. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100, and to me, even more miraculous, when his mother, who had been barren her whole adult life, was 90 years old. Remember, she laughed at how incredulous it was that at 90, God would give her a baby. But we don't need to miss the fact that Rebekah's pregnancy was also a result of divine intervention. God also enabled Rebekah to become pregnant just as he had enabled Sarah to bear children. It was an answer to Isaac's prayer. But here's the thing about that. Even though she'd never been pregnant before, after a period of time, Rebekah started to notice something's not right here. Something's off. And we read in 25:22 that the babies jostled each other within her. And she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord spoke to her. Now, exactly how he spoke, once again, every time we read that, I think, yeah, but how did you speak to them? How did that happen? Was it a vision like Abraham experienced time and time again? Was it a disembodied yet audible voice? How did God speak to her? We don't know because we're not told. What we are told is what he said to her. And this is what he told her. In Genesis 25 and verse 23, the Lord said to Rebekah, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." So from this, she knew some things that she hadn't known before. First one was that she was carrying twins. No wonder she was feeling such rumbles. The other thing she learned from what the Lord told her was that most likely these babies, these twins, were boy babies, because the Lord said nations will come from these two, different, separate nations. So she's carrying twin sons. He also told her that one nation would be stronger than the other nation. So she's now armed with information about these children who are yet to be born. But I'm guessing that the thing that stood out to her most of all from what the Lord said was when he said to her, "The older will serve the younger," because that was a complete reversal of what was the natural order of things in that day and in that culture. So I'm thinking she hung on to that as well as anything else the Lord said. The older shall serve the younger. Now, in that culture, in that day, when the father died, the oldest son automatically became head of the family. It was an instantaneous given. It became his responsibility then to take on the leadership role over that family, both spiritually and in practical matters. He was now the guy in charge. The, the older son at that point in time, when the father died, was also given a double portion of the father's inheritance, of his wealth, as it was divided among the children. When we read that, we think, wow, that was quite a perk, wasn't it? But not necessarily. That wasn't the mindset so much. It wasn't just so that he would have more money than anybody else, that he was just that special. It was because he was also given the responsibility, after his father passed, to now take care of his mother. But not just his mother. Any sisters that were unmarried also became his responsibility. Any sisters that were widowed and their children became his responsibility. So that double portion was to make provision for these responsibilities he inherited, along with the privilege of being the leader of the family. So he was the leader in practical matters, but then he was also the leader in spiritual matters. It fell to him to do a number of things. First of all, was to be the representative of the family before God. He was almost like the priest of the family. If there was a need, it was his responsibility to take that need to the Lord on behalf of that family member or that family situation. He was also responsible to teach the members of his family the ways of God. And in this particular family, he was to teach them about the promises of God, because these were unique promises to this family. And then it was understood that through him, any promises, any rights that belonged to that family would now be carried forth through the older brother, who now had inherited all this responsibility as a birthright. So it was a privilege. People looked up to you, but it was also a responsibility. We read a little bit later in Genesis 25 and verses 24 that when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to these boys. So let's talk about these babies. Let's look first at the firstborn. We're told that he came out with kind of a red color. I'm picturing in my mind, you've seen fair-skinned people that have kind of a ruddy, reddish tone complexion. I'm picturing this on that baby. But they also said that his whole body was covered like he was wearing a hairy garment. That's why they named him Esau, because Esau literally means hairy in the Hebrew. So we could call him hairy, but it's not the same hairy, right? But they named him hairy, they named him Esau. Now, because that's kind of odd, I did a little extra checking on that. I thought, that's just odd, isn't it? And you know, some of you probably already know this, particularly if you're a medical person, but there is a condition, and it's called lanugo, Lanugo, in which babies are born. They come out of the womb with this fine covering of hair still on their bodies. The reason that hair's there in the first place is to protect their little bodies from the amniotic fluid in their mother's womb. It also helps regulate their body temperature in the womb. But most of the time, they shed that hair before they're born. But it does happen, and I'm told it's not that uncommon, that a baby won't shed that hair before it's born. And so when the baby's born, it literally comes out with its little body covered with this fine hair. And I'm just guessing from that this was the case with Esau, that he was a child who didn't shed that hair in the womb, and so he was born with that hairy covering. Therefore, his name His parents thought, well, how fitting is that? We'll name him Harry because he's covered with the hair. The thing about that hairy covering is when a child's born with it, eventually, like in a matter of just a few weeks, they shed and it goes away. So it's not a problem, it's temporary, but it's a little out of the ordinary. However, as we go forward in our study, we are going to learn that even into adulthood, that Esau was a hairy man. He was I picture him now as an adult as a very virile, strong, masculine, hairy kind of guy, because even as an adult. So apparently he just had a propensity for that. It showed up early, but it carried on, but it wasn't the same hair that he was born with. So I want you to know that, okay? All right, so his parents named him Esau. They named him Harry. The second baby, we're told, came out holding, grasping the heel of his brother. And so they named him Jacob, because in the Hebrew, Jacob literally means heel grabber. The thing about that name, though, is it can also mean one who trips another up. I don't think that's what they had in mind, but just so you know, it can also carry with it that meaning. Now, beginning in verse 27, we learn that as the boys grew, Esau became a skillful hunter. Jacob, on the other hand, was content to stay home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. In other words, both parents had a favorite son. To me, that is a sign of dysfunction in a family when parents have favorites, and yet we all know that happens. There may be some of you sitting here today who experienced that firsthand in your own life. Maybe your parents had a favorite. Maybe you were that favorite, or maybe you weren't. But it happens in families. It's not a good thing. Not only is it unfortunate, it's unhealthy for both children, or as many children as might be involved. It's not a good thing, but it was the norm in Isaac and Rebekah's household. Each of them had a favorite son among the two. In Genesis 25, beginning in verse 29, we read, "Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, 'Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished.' That is why he is also called Edom." I'm just going to stop for a second here and tell you that Edom means red. He went for the red stew. He obviously was later nicknamed Edom. And the people that would descend from him, that weaker nation, would be known as the Edomites. Okay? All right, so he says, "I'm famished. Let me have some of that red stew." Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." And you're like, "What?" "Look," Esau said, "I'm about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Now, when I read that, I'm thinking that is a crazy story, isn't it? I mean, is it not a crazy story? But you know what else it is? It's a revealing story. It reveals to us the character, it reveals to us the nature of these two sons. Let's look first at Jacob and at Jacob's mindset. From what's going on here, I think it's reasonable for us to conclude that to Jacob, that birthright was a thing of great value. It was a privilege and a responsibility that he was all about. Because Rebekah is the one who received that prediction, that prophecy, while the babies were still in her womb, and was told that the older would serve the younger, the younger being Jacob. I have no doubt in my mind as I read the rest of what takes place that probably for all of his life, she reminded him of that prophecy, to the point that Jacob got to a point not only did he see it as something quite valuable, but as something that by right, by prophecy, by God's own prediction, was his. It belonged to him. God said so. He told his mother. So this is Jacob's mindset, I think, revealed here. But let's look at a minute at his nature. The way he just popped in with that, I think, is a demonstration to us of the reputation he has, even today, as being a shrewd man in his early days, even cunning, we might say. I will say to his credit, however, he did not deceive Esau here. He didn't trick him, but I do wonder if he did not, in some way, manipulate him in that he knew his brother well. He knew the weaknesses of his character, and so he played it. He saw an opportunity, and he thought, you know what? He's hungry. I know how he is. I'm just going to throw it out there, like we throw spaghetti against the wall and see if it sticks. And it did. Esau went for it. Esau sold him his birthright for a bowl of stew. I thought back when I was looking at these aspects of him, and I thought, one who trips another up. Seems to be appropriate here, maybe. What about Esau? What do we learn about Esau? Let's look first at his nature, the nature I'm thinking that Jacob had observed all his life. First of all, Esau was clearly a man who lived in the moment. He was about the here and now. What can you do for me right this second? He was impulsive, and clearly he was more concerned about immediate gratification than any long-term results of a quick decision made on impulse. I think that's what we see as being the nature of Esau. I think that's probably what Jacob saw as being the nature of his brother Esau. But what about his mindset, especially about the value of the birthright? Clearly, he did not hold it in the same high esteem that Jacob did, or he wouldn't have sold it as he did. I'm thinking because he was a what about right now, and that's out there, that he saw the birthright as, kind of like pie in the sky and the sweet by and by. What about right now? I'm hungry. And so his nature, his mindset caused him to sell his birthright for a bowl of stew. Now, it's a crazy story, but you know what we get from this crazy story? A real solid principle. And here's the principle that we can find here. This is it. If we don't value the things of God, we risk losing the blessings of God. If we don't value the things of God, we risk losing the blessings of God. That's true of individuals, as we see here, but it's also true of nations, isn't it? It grieves me, and I know it probably grieves many of you as well, to see the direction many of our fellow citizens are taking today when they no longer value the things of God. It puts not only them, but our entire nation at risk of losing the very special blessings that as a people we have received from God. We need to pray for our nation. We need to pray for our leaders. But ladies, we also need to pray for ourselves, that we don't get lazy or neglectful along the way, that we don't begin to just set the things of God on the back burner, or for goodness sake, fail to pass them on to the next generation. It's a crazy story, but it's a solid principle. If we begin to neglect the things of God, we risk losing the blessings of God. We come now to our second division, And I just want to warn you before we get there, if this birthright story makes you a little bit uncomfortable, it's about to get a lot worse. To set up what's coming next, the scripture even prepares us with a little tidbit of information, and it's found in chapter 26, verses 34 and 35. And here it says, when Esau was 40 years old, he married 2 Hittite girls. They were living in Canaan. The Hittites were Canaanites. He married not 1, but 2 Hittite girls, and they were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Now again, remember the stories overlap. Think back to last week. What did Abraham do to procure a wife for Isaac? A godly wife. He sent his servant all the way back to Haran to find someone from his own family so that Isaac would not marry a Canaanite girl. And he even said, don't take him back there either. You leave him here, you bring back a godly girl, not a Canaanite. Do not let him marry a Canaanite girl. Why? Because they were a pagan people. They were a pagan people. They worshiped other gods. He said, do not do that. And now, I think by this time, surely, and I know for a fact, Abraham's passed. So he didn't live to see this. But his oldest grandson has now married not 1, but 2 Canaanite girls. How heartbroken he would have been. But when you read that little tidbit, that little insert there, it says to me that, this is probably an indication of why Esau was not first choice in the mind of God to be the spiritual leader of this family. But then I couldn't help but wonder, did not Isaac see that? Did he not see it at all? Or did he simply choose to ignore it because he loved this older son the best? If it was a matter of him choosing to just ignore it, then I think we can safely assume that he then also chose to ignore the prediction, the prophecy, so to speak, that Rebekah was given before the boys were ever born. And he surely knew it, as we will see later on in the story. So he just chose to ignore it. And the reason we know that is because in Genesis 27, Isaac began to make plans to give the family blessing to Esau instead of Jacob. You see, the thing was, whoever had the birthright also got the blessing. Jacob already had the birthright. Jacob had the prophecy that he would be the leader of that family when Isaac passed on. But what did Isaac do? It says in verse 1 of chapter 27, he told Isaac to go out into the field and hunt some game. He said, such that I love, to cook it for him and to bring it to him to eat so that he could give him his blessing before he died. At this point, Isaac was getting older. He could no longer see. And so he just presumed that he probably didn't have that much longer to live. So while he was still alive and had his faculties, he was going to go ahead and get ahead of the game, so to speak, by giving the blessing to Esau. So he says, son, go out, find me some game, cook it for me, come back, I'll eat, and then I'll give you the blessing. The blessing that now even Isaac surely knew belonged to Jacob, whether he liked it or not. Well, as it just so happened, Rebekah overheard this conversation between Isaac and Esau. And so then she called for her favorite son, Jacob. And she said to him, go into the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats. I'm going to prepare them the way your father likes them. And then I'm going to give them to you. And you're going to go in there and pretend to be Esau and get that blessing that rightly is yours. It speaks again, I think, of Jacob's nature and his response to his mother. He did not say to her mother, I can't do that. That's wrong. That's wrong. He's my father. His response was, but what if I get caught? What if he realizes that I'm not really Esau? He says in 27:12, my brother Esau is a hairy man Well, I have smooth skin. What if he touches me? What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him, you think? And I would bring down on myself a curse rather than a blessing. Rebekah's answer was, let the curse fall on me, just go get the goats. And so he did. When he brought the goats to her, she prepared them, and she must have been a terrific cook because ultimately Isaac did believe it was wild game that he was being served. She cooked the goats, and then she put Esau's best clothes on her son Jacob so that Jacob would smell like his brother Esau. Remember, he was an outdoors guy. And then she took goat skins, no doubt from the goats she had cooked, and covered the hands and the smooth part of Jacob's neck with goat skin so it would feel hairy. Then she put the food in his hand and sent him into his father. Now, from the moment Jacob approached his father, Isaac was suspicious. He was older, he couldn't see, but he was suspicious that something here was just not right. Jacob showed up and he says, basically, I'm paraphrasing, "Hi, Dad, it's Esau. I've come for the blessing." And Isaac's like, something's off here. His first question to Jacob, pretending to be Esau, was, how did you come across and prepare this game so quickly? To his shame, Jacob said, the Lord your God gave me success. He brought the Lord into it. But Isaac still wasn't convinced. He said to him, come close so I can touch you, so that I might know if you really are Esau. I mean, he was just flat out letting him know, I'm not sure I'm buying this. After he touched him, he said, well, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the touch, the skin, is the hair of Esau. So now he's beginning to doubt himself, but he's still not 100% sure of this. So he asks again, are you really my son Esau? And again, Jacob lied, and he said, yes, I am. And so Isaac ate the meal that had been prepared for him in preparation to give who he thought was Esau the blessing. But just before he did, he thought, I'm just one final check on this. So he says to Jacob, who he thinks could be Esau, he says, kiss me, my son, kiss me. And so Jacob leaned over and kissed him. And when he did, the smell of Esau's clothing went up his nostrils, and he was convinced, okay, this is the smell of the field. This is the smell of my son Esau. And he blessed Jacob. The blessing he gave him is found in chapter 27 of Genesis, verses 28 and 29. And here's what the blessing said. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, abundant grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers. May the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and may those who bless you be blessed. Now, when a father gave a blessing nearing the end of his life before he died over a son, it wasn't just wishful thinking. It's not like, here's what I hope for you, here's what I wish for you. It was literally led by the Spirit of God in these cases. It was a prophetic blessing for God's care, God's direction, God's provision, and the blessing that he gave, once given, was irrevocable. So he gave the blessing to Jacob, thinking it was Esau, and it was done. It could not be taken back. It could not be transferred. It was done. It was permanent. In verse 30, we read that as soon as he got the blessing, Jacob skedaddled. You know what that skedaddled means? He had scarcely left when Esau returned. Esau then shows up with the food he's prepared, and he brings it in to Isaac, looking for his blessing. And Isaac, realizing what has happened, was horrified. Don't miss and don't ever forget, ladies, Isaac's reaction. We're told that Isaac trembled violently. He trembled violently. Was it out of anger? No. It was out of fear, a reverential fear. He realized that his attempt to alter God's will had been overturned, and he began to shake violently with that realization. We cannot alter God's will, ladies, and when we try, we're setting ourselves up to be at odds with our God. Isaac realized that. To his horror, he trembled violently. But wait a minute. Wasn't Jacob the one that went in there and tricked him, basically deceived him? Yeah, he was. In the natural, it's on Jacob. But in the spiritual realm and in the reality of things, in the broader picture of what's true, it was God who upended Isaac's plan of disobedience, really. Esau now knows that his brother has his blessing. And we're told in verse 34 that with a loud and bitter cry, he pleaded with Isaac, Father, please bless me too. Don't you have a blessing for me too? Isaac, I think maybe more stoic now, said, your brother has come and deceitfully stolen your blessing. To which Isaac began to moan and groan. He said, now twice he has done me wrong, so to speak. He stole, which he did not. He stole my birthright. No, he didn't. That was on Esau. But now he's also stolen my blessing, and that was on Jacob. He was right. He wept aloud repeatedly, please, Father, please bless me too. Please, don't you have one blessing for me? And Isaac ultimately did bless him, but it was also prophetically. And so the blessing that Esau received was that he would not have the abundance of the fields. He would not have the abundance over peoples that his brother Jacob was given. Instead, he would be a warrior-like people. And the nation that came from him would live by the sword. They would be a warring people. And they were. Well, needless to say, Esau is furious. And in 27:41, he said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. He too thought, Isaac's old. He's not going to live much longer. He says, when he dies, then I will kill my brother Jacob. Rebekah, however, heard Esau planning, and so she intervened once again. In two steps, she intervened. First of all, she warned Jacob, look, your brother's furious and he's planning to kill you. Here's what you need to do. You're going to go to my brother's house in Haran, my brother Laban, and you're just going to lay low for a while until Esau's anger subsides, until he just gets over it, and then you can come back here. She went first to Jacob. The sad thing about that is that when Jacob did go to Haran as his mother directed him, it wasn't for a little while. It was for 20 years. And by the time he returned, Rebekah had already passed away. Do you see what happened here? She was never going to see her favorite son ever again. She was going to be living instead with a son that she loved less and his Hittite wives. She then went to Isaac. She was very savvy, that Rebekah, and she complained about how miserable her life was because of Esau's Hittite wives. She said, if Jacob marries a Hittite girl, I just don't think I can bear it. So Isaac picked up on where she was leading him and agreed with her that they should send Jacob then back to Haran to her brother's family to find a wife, a proper wife for Jacob. Now, if you've been listening to what I've been telling you, or you're familiar with the story already yourself, or you've been reading along, let me ask you, am I the only one that is beginning to think at this point in the story that maybe it's not as much Jacob as it is Rebecca who's the wheeler dealer in this family? Do you see her weaving in her little plots all the way through this story? As women of God, as wives, as mothers, as grandmothers, as sisters, as aunts, whatever your situation may be, ladies, as women, we have influence over people. We do. You know, in the Bible, the main characters are usually men, but there are a number of stories of women in the Bible as well, and in most cases, we see the influence that they wield to change things without anybody really suspecting what just happened. We have that power. You have that power. I have that power. How how will we use the power of influence as a woman that we have, particularly as a woman of God? Will we use it to honor the Lord, or will we maybe unwittingly use it in ways that would dishonor the Lord? It's a gift of sorts that God has given us. We need to be responsible and careful how we use it. We come now to our third division, which is Jacob's dream. In Genesis 28, we're told that, as directed by now both of his parents, Jacob left home, ostensibly to get a wife, a proper wife, but in reality, it was to escape the wrath of his brother Esau. He was looking for a place of safety. Now, at the time, they lived in Beersheba. Haran, which is where Laban was, which is where Rebekah came from, was a 500-mile journey that took several months to make. So Jacob has a long, long haul in front of him, and he's going alone. When he stopped that first night to rest, he was still in the land of Canaan. He hadn't even gotten outside the borders of Canaan yet. He was still in Canaan, but the sun was going down, and so it was time to stop and to seek some sleep. And so he came to a place where there was a city by the name of Luz, L-U-Z, which means almond tree, which is irrelevant at the moment, but won't be in a few minutes. So he took a stone from that place, and he laid it down, and in a sense, he used it for a pillow. He went to sleep with his head on that stone. Perhaps it was to rest his weary body, but also as an escape from some of the things and the emotions he was struggling with. He was alone, and I'm guessing he was fearful, not only at being alone, but would Isaac come after him? He's alone. He'd be a sitting duck. The areas in the wilderness were also known for marauders, robbers, thieves. As he sleeps, will someone come and knock him in the head and take everything he has? Will they kill him? When he gets to Haran, how long will he be there? What does the future hold for him? All these things, all this anxiety, surely is going on in his head and in his heart. And I'm guessing most of all, he's already missing his family and he's missing home. So he lays down to sleep with a stone under his head. And he has a dream. And in this dream, he saw a staircase that started on the earth, that was based on the earth, and went all the way up to the top of heaven. Now, in some of your translations, it will say a ladder, and that's where we get the phrase Jacob's ladder. And there are all kinds of things that have been named after Jacob's ladder. There's a rope trick named Jacob's Ladder. There's a song called Jacob's Ladder. There's a movie, I think, called Jacob's Ladder. But it was really more like a stairway. And on this stairway that went all the way up to heaven, Jacob saw the angels of God ascending and then descending up and down that stairway. And above the stairway, at the very top, stood the Lord himself in this dream of Jacob's. And the Lord spoke to him. Well, at least we know how he spoke to him, right? Spoke to him in a dream. But here's what the Lord said when he spoke to him in this dream. He first identified himself as the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. And that, quite frankly, is how Jacob knew of God. He knew of him as the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. But then, beginning in verse 13, he gives to Jacob two sets of promises. In the first set of promises, he basically reiterates all those covenant promises that had already been given to Abraham and passed on to Isaac. They are now being passed on to Jacob. Remember, the first promise was that he would be given a land. He said to him, I will give you and your descendants the land that you're lying on right now. Well, where was he? He was in Canaan. I will give you and your descendants this land that you're lying on right now. Secondly, he said to him, I will give you descendants so numerous they will be like the dust of the earth. We've already seen that Abraham was shown the stars in the sky and told to count them if he could. So shall your descendants be, the Lord said to Abraham. He now says to Jacob, they'll be like the dust of the earth. I want you just to picture yourself for a moment at the beach, okay? And you grab a handful of sand and you let it flow through your fingers. How many people would that handful of sand represent? He said, like the dust of the earth, so shall they be, from the north to the south, to the east, to the west. And then he says, and to me again, this is the most significant, that all peoples of the earth will be blessed through your seed. Again, we understand that to be a promise of the coming Messiah, of the Lord Jesus. But then he went on to give him yet a second set of promises. He promised Jacob that I will be with you. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go. Now that sounds really great to us, but it was particularly great to Jacob because he was about to leave the land he was in, which was home to him, and go to Haran, which was his relative's home. And God is saying to him, even in Haran, I will be with you. This would have been particularly significant to him because the pagan gods were also local gods. There might be a promise, of course it would be an empty promise, that I don't know where you would even come up with it, but it was believed that the local gods would look after you as long as you were in their locale. But if you stepped out of the borders of a place where that god was the god, you were on your own. That pagan god was not going with you. God says to him, I will watch over you wherever you go. And then I will bring you back to this land. And I will not leave you until I have done all that I promised you. Now, this was a spectacular dream, so we know right off the bat this is no ordinary dream. But it's more than just a revelation of this baton, so to speak, being passed to Jacob. It goes much deeper. Because if you look at it closely, if you camp out on it for a few minutes, you begin to realize that this dream was also a grand display of the mercy of God. It was. Think about what we know that Jacob's been involved in recently as we come to this point. He, at least probably, manipulated his brother into selling him his birthright. And then he outright deceived his elderly, blind father to steal the family blessing. But when God spoke to him in this dream, God never mentioned any of that. Not a word, not an attitude, no reprimand, no rebuke. no shaming. This dream was a picture of God's mercy because instead of rebuking him, calling him out for any of that, he showered him with promises of blessing. And lady, that's what the mercy of God looks like. The mercy of God is this: he withholds punishment that's deserved while at the same time pouring out kindness that's not deserved. That's what the mercy of God looks like, and that's what's on display here. But the greatest display of God's mercy, even in this dream, is that ladder. You know how I know that? Because in John chapter 1 and verse 50, this is in the New Testament now, we're high hurdling from the old to the new. In John chapter 1, verse 50, Jesus said, in reference to Jacob's ladder, that Jacob's stairway, he said, I am that stairway. I am that ladder. You see, girls, there's a gulf between God and man that's caused by sin. And you and I can't bridge that gulf, that gap on our own. We can't be good enough. We can't be smart enough. We can't be cute enough. There's nothing you and I can do to bridge that gap. But Jesus is saying here, I am the bridge. I am the stairway. Because Jesus made it possible for us to have access to God without rebuke and with being showered with blessings. Because Jesus took the punishment for your sins and for mine on our behalf. And when we accept that, then we have access through Jesus, the bridge, the stairway, the ladder, to God and God's heaven. But that's the only way we have that access. Also in John, and this time in chapter 14 and verse 6, Jesus also said, no one comes to the Father except through me. We can't escape the punishment and receive the blessings any other way except for Jesus. He is the stairway, and he points that out in John chapter 1. The next morning, Jacob got up and he's still shaken. He's afraid, it says, because he's thinking, surely this is the house of God and the gateway to heaven, and I never knew it. And so he renamed the city of Luz Bethel, which literally means house of God. And that name it holds today. And then he made a vow to God. We find that in 28:20. And he says in this vow, let me turn to it quickly. He says, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey that I'm taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. There's an if and there's a then. If God will do, then he will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. I don't know how you feel about that vow, but it saddens me just a little bit. I'm thinking, Jacob, you just saw the Lord. He spoke to you. He made promises to you. And so in response, you're giving him a conditional vow. Now, I will tell you, because some of you have heard this, that there are some scholars who think that where it's translated if, it really means since. But even if it means since you will do all these things for me, then you will be my God, we still got to deal with the then. If you do this, then you will be my God. Let's change it to since. Since you will do that, then you will be my God. Let's see how it pans out. That's a little bit disappointing in a sense, but on the other hand, in fairness to Jacob and everybody else who comes to the Lord for the very first time, either a seeker or a new believer, we all got to start somewhere. And for Jacob, this was at least a start. He was taking it seriously, at least, right? And he was willing to move forward with God and to see if these things would be so. He was willing to give it a shot. Now, everybody in here, in truth, is on a different place in our walk with the Lord. Some of you are brand new in your walk with the Lord. So you're maybe even identifying with Jacob's wait and see kind of attitude. Others of you have been walking with the Lord for decades. We're all in a different place, in a different season of life, even a different season with the Lord. But here's my advice for all of us, where you're brand new or you've been walking with the Lord for 70 years, whichever category you might fall into, let's keep moving forward, all of us. Those who are new, give God a shot and see if he won't prove himself to you. If you're sincerely looking for God to show you that he is the real deal, if you are sincere from your heart of hearts, God will show you. Give him a chance. Move forward. Just keep moving forward. No matter how things look, no matter how you feel, you just keep moving forward. And God will show you that he is God. He will. But those of you who are seasoned believers, keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. Sometimes we get into kind of a spiritual rut, and it's easy just to kind of coast, isn't it? Instead of moving forward with the Lord, continuing to grow, continuing to reach out to other people, continuing to be a light in the darkness, we also need to just keep moving forward. And when we do, there may be a time when God will call out your name, not just for salvation, but for some opportunity of service. Now, every opportunity of service is not church ministry. It may be to share the gospel with a neighbor. It may be to pray with someone who has a flat tire on the side of the road and she's terrified and don't know what to do. It may be someone who's mourning the loss of someone they love. Wherever God gives you an opportunity and you feel him tugging at your heartstrings saying, you do that, please make yourself available, because God is famously renowned for using ordinary people for extraordinary things. If you're an ordinary person, I am, make yourself available and see if God will not use you. Okay? All right, if you'll bow with me, ladies, I'm going to close this in prayer. Lord, thank you for Jacob's story. Thank you for showing us that you're not looking for perfect people to work through. You work through people wherever they are, and you make them into who they need to be your vessel. Father, for those who are seeking or who are new, encourage them that they may be the very person that you have a plan for somewhere along the way that they have no idea of right now. For others of us, Lord, who may be more seasoned, help us not to just retire from service, but to also keep moving on, to always, to the very end, make ourselves available to you so that people who don't know you can see who and what you are like through us, that you will be glorified in, that you will be honored. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, ladies.